We're Zayin Amud Aleph 7a at the top of the page. We begin a new section. We're at the Mishnah. I just need to make a small correction that Rabbi Gimple pointed out to me. I was running off the assumption of an earlier Rashi, comment of Rashi, and I missed a later one. It's a small detail, but it's an important one. Namely, we were talking about Rav Shesh's view that witnesses that arrive and inform us of what happened behind closed doors renders the Sotah invalid retroactively, and therefore the flour, even after it has been put into the holy vessel, can be used for mundane purposes because it was sanctified under wrong pretenses because of the presence of witnesses somewhere in the world, and now that they're here, we know about them. So I had said that the way to make them mundane is by redeeming them. That's true according to Rav Yosef. According to Rav Sheshes, because it was consecrated under false pretenses, it's actually just straight out mundane, unless we're concerned, as the Gemara tells us later, we're concerned with the optics of what people see about it. Okay, but I just want to make that correction. Okay, so we're at the second line on Zayin Amud Aleph 7a, top of the page. Mishnah, or Nisan, our Mishnah, reads, Ketzad Oisalo, what should he do with her? He warned her against secluding herself with a certain man. She did. And there are witnesses to the event. As described earlier in the Gemara, the amount of witnesses required according to different opinions. And we don't know what happened behind closed doors. So this is the bona fide woman. So the first step is he brings her to the local court. So they're living in some town in Israel somewhere. And the first step is go to the local court and make your case. Make your case as to why your wife is a Sotah. Tell them what happened, present them your witnesses, and make your case. Now, if they determine that she's indeed a Sotah, then Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, and then she is put in the hands of two scholars, and then all four of them, the two scholars, this woman and the husband, they now travel to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, because as we're going to learn later, she drinks water only in Jerusalem and in the presence of the high court there. So after the determination of the local court, she's then put into the hands of two scholars, or they are, the couple is put into the hands of two accompanying scholars, and they travel to Jerusalem. Now, why do you have to have these two scholars to accompany them? Why not just he himself? Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, lest husband and wife engage intimately on their way to Jerusalem. And at this point, they're not allowed to be. They're not allowed to be together until we determine what happened, until the Sotah waters determine what happened behind closed doors. So in order to prevent that, we have them be accompanied by two scholars who are like guardians, so that they remain separate intimately and until they come to Jerusalem. Rabbi Yehuda says, Baila neman Allah. The husband itself is trusted not to engage with her. We don't have to send the two scholars. That's what it seems. So it would seem from Rabbi Yehuda that you don't have to send the two scholars because we trust the husband not to engage with her. So this is the Mishnah. Before the Gemara gets to analyzing the position of Rabbi Yehuda and exactly where he stands and why it is that he trusts that the husband will not engage with her, and he doesn't require that they accompany with two scholars. The Gemara first begins with why you need two, why not one? Why not one? Why two? So says the Gemara, today you've got two scholars who are accompanying them, and he, the husband. ha'atlasa, giving us a total of 3 men accompanying this one woman. That seems to be the Mishnah's position. So says the Gemara commenting, Lema, let us then suggest, misayele, that this statement, this fact of the Mishnah, that requires 3 people to accompany this woman, the 2 scholars and the husband, that supports Lerav, it supports the opinion of Rav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, for Rav Yehuda taught us in the name of Rav as follows. The Mishnah. No, Rav is a sage of the Gemara's era from the first or the second generation of the Gemara, but he's post-Mishnaic. You're thinking of Rabbi. Rabbi with a Yud, that refers to Yehuda Anasi. Rav is the next generation. Without the Yud, just the Reish Beis. Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda is the name of Rav. The context in which Rav is speaking, as Rashi informs us, is Rav is speaking in the Tractate of Kedushin, where there discusses the laws of Yichud. Yichud is prohibition against a man and a woman being secluded in the same room. They shouldn't be alone in the same room. That's literally what Yichud means. Yichud just means singularity, or like secluded. And man and woman who are forbidden to each other should not be alone in the same room, lest something wrong happen. Today, in the era of Me Too, this is just prudent. Just, it turns out to be a very wise law, right? People used to kind of, I don't want to say poke fun, but people used to point fingers at this law as if like, come on, all men and women are animals. You have to have someone with you. They can't be alone together. They can't be trusted for a few minutes together. Like, come on. But today, it's just good sense. Don't be alone in the same room. And there are all kinds of laws about that, as to when and how, and if the door is open, if the door is not open, do you expect anybody to come in at any moment, right? Which would prevent you from doing anything, which should prevent one from doing anything. I shouldn't use the word you, and so on and so forth, all kinds of laws. Now, one of them is the Mishnah says that a woman could be alone with 2 men, because the 2 of them, hopefully, would prevent each other from doing anything. And therefore, one woman with 2 men is not as a problem. And therefore, the law of Yichud doesn't apply. Now, commenting on that, Amar Rav said, Lo shanu, this is only said, Ela be'ir, only in a city. In a city where, in a metropolis, where there's lots of movement and lots of action and lots of people, then with 2 men, it's less of a concern that something might happen. Aval b'derech, but when they are traveling, one woman traveling with 2 men alone, then adika shleisha, you need 3 men. Why? Because when you're traveling and there's not as much activity, then shema yitztarech echad mehen lenokvav. One of the 2 men might need to go to the bathroom, which would result in one of the other man who doesn't need the bathroom, now being alone with this woman. So when you're on the road and there's less movement, there's less activity, even with 2 men, it's very likely that over the course of their travels, one of them will be alone with this woman for some time, and that is what we want to avoid. But if therefore, when they're traveling, require 3, so that even if one of them has to go to the bathroom, there's at least 2 remaining behind. And therefore, says the Gemara, our Mishnah, which tells us that she needs to have 3 men going with her, the husband plus 2 scholars, seems to support Rav's contention that when you're traveling, you need 3, not 2. They seem to be saying the same thing. Says the Gemara, Loi. No, this is not conclusive support. It's not a contradiction, but it's not conclusive support from our Mishnah that you must have 3 every time. Because we might say, Hacha, here in our Mishnah, Hainu Taima, this is the reason why you have to have 2 scholars. Not because we're worried about one of them being alone with her. If there's only 1 scholar going along with them, then that would mean it's her plus 2 men, husband and scholar. And we were suggesting, using Rav's logic, that the reason why that is no good is because one of them might need to go to the bathroom, leaving the other one alone with her. And therefore the Mishnah says 3, right? So that was the suggestion. But says the Gemara, there could be a different reason for why we need two scholars to come along. Not because we're concerned of one going to the bathroom and leaving the other one behind, but rather, but this is the reason. So that these two should be witnesses. In other words, if husband and wife decide that they do want to become together, they do want to be intimate, then these two men who are there can come to court and come to the high court in Jerusalem and say, call off Sotah, because we saw them be together, and therefore Sotah law is off. So therefore, the Gemara is saying that our Mishnah isn't conclusive evidence that as a rule, two men shouldn't travel alone with one woman. This is not a rule for that. This is a unique scenario where we want to have two men in addition to the husband, lest we need them to be witnesses to what happened when they traveled. But not because it isn't conclusive evidence that as a rule, you always have to have three men with this one woman, which was Rav's ruling. So this is not a contradiction to Rav's statement, but it isn't conclusive evidence or proof to Rav's statement, because there could be other reasonings for why in this scenario you need to have two in addition to the husband. Okay, so the suggestion, good morning, Scott. So the suggestion at the moment is that the reason why we would need to have two scholars in addition to the husband is because we want these two scholars to be potential witnesses lest something go down while they are traveling. Says the Gemara, if all you're concerned about is having witnesses, then Talmud Chachamim, you have to have specifically scholars, righteous men. Yes, they work, Kula al Maloi, but anybody else is no good. It almost sounds like you have to have scholars be witnesses, right? Because we're sending them along with two scholars, unless you say the reason is because we want them to be witnesses. Well, why are we sending two scholars? There's no qualification that you have to be a scholar to be a witness in a court. Anybody can be a witness. So send along any two men. Why does the Mishnah say two scholars specifically? That two scholars have to go along with the husband and wife if the only concern is witnesses. So says the Gemara, Lema, let us suggest then that Misayele, the fact that our Mishnah rules that the husband and wife must travel with two scholars and not just two ordinary people, this is support to a different statement that Rav made. The Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav. Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav that Loishonu, that when we learn that a woman is allowed to be secluded with two men, right? That's what we mentioned. We mentioned that the laws of Yichud, if there's two men, there's not a problem because the two of them will keep each other in check. So Rav commented and said, Lo Yishanu, this is only true, Elok shaded. Only if these are two upstanding good men of good repute, i.e. scholars. And therefore the two of them will prevent each other from misbehaving, right? Even a scholar, the greatest of them, alone, should not be alone with a woman, even the greatest of scholars. The Torah has a rule which is, Ein apotropos la'arayos. A person cannot be held responsible. A person should not trust him, can't he be held responsible, but a person should not trust himself with regard to intimacy. We're all human and we're all biological and we all have urges. But when you have two scholars who are both trying to maintain a certain standard of living, then they'll keep each other in check. But Aval, says Rav, Perutzin, men of ill repute, then afilu asara namiloi, then even 10 men should not be alone with one woman. If they're men of ill repute, then they would not just not prevent each other from doing something negative, they might actually encourage each other. So when a woman is alone with a man, one man, certainly she shouldn't. And likewise, a man with a woman. If it's two men, she has to think about whether she trusts them to keep each other in check. But if they're the kind of people that might encourage each other to do bad behavior, then don't do that. Don't go there. So now, says the Gemara, the fact that our Mishnah sends two scholars specifically to accompany the husband and wife as they travel to Jerusalem, this supports Rav's contention. Because if you have men of ill repute, even if you had 10, 15, it wouldn't be helpful. Because as soon as the husband goes to the bathroom, they might misbehave. And therefore, the Gemara Mishnah specifically says, send two scholars so that they'll keep each other in check. Two men who want to be of moral good standing, and that way they'll keep each other in check. And this supports Rav's view that when the Mishnah said that a woman's allowed to be alone with two men, it's only specifically two men of good reputation, but not two men of ill repute. And that's supported by our Mishnah, which says that they should be accompanied with two scholars. And the Gemara concludes, and this is, sorry?
I'm sorry, but if you have one of those scholars going to the bathroom, I'm traveling, now you're left with the husband.
But then the husband, right, so if you had, good question, so if one of the two scholars went to the bathroom, right, then the scholar would prevent the husband from doing anything wrong, and the husband would allow the scholar from doing anything wrong because it's his wife, right? The only question is when the husband goes to the bathroom, the two are left alone, are they going to misbehave? So if they're men of ill repute, then they might misbehave when the husband goes to the bathroom. But because they're scholars, they'll prevent each other. And therefore this supports Rav's view that men of ill repute are not to be trusted even if they're in a gang.
How did they travel in those days?
How do they travel? They traveled on camel, on donkey, on foot, I assume.
So, okay, but you had you can't get all those people on a donkey.
Okay, so
They had to have several donkeys.
yeah, I assume so. I don't know.
Right. I thought if they went on a coach or something like that, you've got a driver already, so that's a third person.
Right. So if you have a driver, then that would be counted as another person. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If you had a driver. Oftentimes you had a caravan, which meant you had a leader. You had just generally a lot of people. That's how most people would travel back in the day. It would have been caravans, specifically for this reason. You want to travel with a lot of people so that you're safer from pirates. Well, not pirates. They're called something pirates in the desert. But nomads. Sorry? Bandits, highway robbers, whatever.
Marauders.
Sorry?
Marauders.
Marauders, that's what they're called?
Yeah.
Okay, now the Gemara tells us an incredible story. Sorry? Yeah, Judge. Yes. So now the Gemara tells us an incredible story which supports Rav's view in taking this precaution not to allow men of ill repute, even many of them, to be with a woman alone. So the Mishnah, the Gemara tells us, Ma'isa Haya, there was a story. Vayitziyu Sarah b'mita, 10 men carried a woman out on a bed, pretending that she was dead. And they made as if they were doing the funeral procession, carrying her out of the city to bury her. And they engaged with her intimately. And they put on this whole ruse just so that they can have their way with her. 10 men. Maybe they knocked her out. I don't know. Doesn't say specifically. But they took her out and people watched them carrying him out. Okay, there's a funeral procession. They're taking her out. And then they had their way with her. So this story supports Rav's view not to allow a woman to be alone with many men if they are men of ill repute. Says the Gemara, okay, so all to say that our Mishnah, which says that the husband and wife that are Sotah are accompanied with two scholars, supports this view because they specifically say scholars. Says the Gemara Loi, this is not a contradiction, but it's not a conclusive evidence. This is not conclusive evidence. It's not conclusive proof to Rav's view. Why? Because there could be another reason why our Mishnah says you have to have two scholars. We're assuming the reason why the Mishnah says you have to have two scholars is because we want them to be men of good rapport so that they don't engage, so that they keep each other in check, not to have their way with this woman. But the Gemara says that could be true, but that's not the only reason why the Mishnah might want to have two scholars. There could be another reason. Namely, here, what's the reason why we want to have scholars? So that they know how to warn him. Because if he wants to be with his wife intimately along the way, the two scholars will tell him, you should know, if you engage intimately with your wife, then the Sotah is not going to work. And if you want to travel to Jerusalem so that those Sotah waters determine what happened behind closed doors, your being intimate with her will ruin that. So we have to have two scholars who kind of know the law so that they can warn them about the law and inform the husband and wife about the law and make sure that they're following the proper procedure. And therefore, the fact that the Mishnah says that the husband and wife need to be accompanied by two scholars isn't conclusive proof to Rav's opinion that men of ill repute should not hang out with a woman alone, although that could be a consideration, but it isn't proof that this is the consideration because there's another consideration. You want to have scholars there so that they can properly warn the husband and wife against doing something that would undermine the Sotah ruling.
Are they
They're not advocating for the two of them to be together. No, they're not advocating that the two of them should be together.
It's their duty to.
But it's their duty. They can't. I don't think they have to physically hold him back from being intimate with her. I don't think they have to do that. But they certainly have to inform him of the consequences of what he does. They should make that warning, because I'll tell you why they should make the warning. Because if they don't give that warning, and the husband doesn't realize, he just thinks that the waters universally will tell us what happened behind closed doors. And in the meantime, they're traveling, they're talking, they're feeling good about each other, and they engage with each other. And he comes to the temple and he thinks, okay, but I still want her to drink the water because I still want to find out what happened last week. And he has no idea that the fact that he was with her ruined that. So if he wants the Sotah to work, if he wants the Sotah procedure to work, he has to know what the laws are regarding that. And therefore they're sending scholars with him.
She doesn't want it to work.
So she
would like it to.
She may want it to end. She may want the husband to engage. She may actually bring him on to try. Yeah, so if she wants to reconcile the marriage, she might take the opportunity of their travels to try to win him back. And he won't realize that by him doing that, he will ruin what the procedure of the Sotah.
So in other words, those scholars are actually advocating.
The scholars are advocating. The scholars aren't advocating on behalf of him or her. They're advocating on behalf of the integrity of the Sotah law. And the integrity of the Sotah law depends on them behaving, which is why the scholars are there. So we'll stop over here. We'll stop over here, and God willing, tomorrow we're going to look at the Gemara's analysis of Rabbi Huda's view. Rabbi Huda's view is that the husband alone is trusted; he will not engage with her, and therefore the presence of scholars aren't required at all. That, God willing, we'll discuss tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Shikach, Rabbi. Thank you so much. God bless you.
As always, have a good day.
Wish you all the very best.